day to you. I hope you all are having a great week whenever you are watching this, and I hope that you're just enjoying the time that we're able to spend in the scriptures together. And we're doing a digging deeper episode again here, which you can use individually or you can use in a small group, life group, as you wish. I realize we're coming to the end for many of the life group semester, but nevertheless, I hope that you're able to find a use for this and maybe integrate this into your personal Bible study, if nothing else. And I am, as always, glad to be with you. So we are talking about loving radically this week as we continue this series through the core values that make us what we are here at Lifepoint, or that we aspire to. This is the DNA, really, that helps us to have a little bit of guidance on what to do and how to make decisions. We use these core values as directives. They're the North Stars that help us to figure out what we should do and how we should do it. And so loving radically is a core part of who we are, very important to us in our ministry here. So that's where we're at, and I want to take you to a different passage than we had dealt with here in the message, where we dealt with the story of the woman caught in adultery. We're going to be looking at a different passage, a parable, a story that Jesus told is what we're going to be looking at today. But before we get there, let me ask these preliminary questions that we always ask. What did you like in the message? What did you like in the message? What was the thing in the message that you really enjoyed, that you really appreciated? So let me give you a moment to talk about that as a group, if you're doing this in a group, or to think about if you're doing it individually. So you can pause here, and we'll get back in a minute. Okay, second question. What did you disagree with in the message? What did you disagree with in the message? Was there something maybe that wasn't clear? Or a question that you had in your mind that was kind of like, what about, and what if, some different contingencies that might come up related to the topic of loving others radically. I invite you to take a minute to discuss that or think about that, and I'm going to pause here for you to do that. Okay, third question. What do you remember the most from the message? What do you remember the most from the message? Was there something that was particularly memorable, something that was something that really stuck out to you from the message that you thought was really meaningful, maybe something that you are thinking about trying to integrate in your life, or even just an illustration that was given that resonated with you? What was the most memorable thing? What do you remember the most from the message? Let me give you a moment to talk about that or think through that. All right. Those questions are repetitive, I understand, but they are really designed to help us integrate what we heard about on Sunday into our lives. They're designed to cause us to think about it, because we are forgetful people. I am getting more and more forgetful, and I realize that it does not take long for us to lose sight of what we heard on Sunday. And so these questions are designed to remind us. And also, since they're opinion-based, there's everybody is an expert on those. There's no right or wrong answer. So second set of questions is what we call My Story. I want to talk to you or ask you a couple questions about your experience in your life. And again, no right or wrong answers here. But the first question I want to ask is, who in your life do you find the most difficult to love, and why? And who in your life, let me ask again, who in your life do you find the most difficult to love, and why? Now, by the way, don't mention any names here. We're not looking for specific names, but who is it in your life? Maybe a person that's in a certain role that you really struggle with loving. Who do you find the most difficult to love, and why? Take a moment to discuss that or think through that. All right. I don't know who that is in your life. Obviously, this is something that's very different for every one of us. It's unique to us as individuals. But sometimes I found that it's those closest to us that we find most difficult to love. I mean, we certainly love them at some level, but to show that love and to demonstrate that love meaningfully, sometimes we end up taking for granted the people that are closest to us, and we don't treat them as well as we should. And so I think that's sometimes the answer. Also, and I think any of us can understand this, but if there's been people who have hurt us deeply, if there's people who have done some kind of injury to us emotionally, or just not been there, not followed through on their word for us, and that was really important, those kinds of things, or maybe somebody just did outright injury to us, just went out of their way to do wrong to us. Hopefully there's not a lot of people in your life that fall in that category, but those people are very difficult to love, are they not? I mean, if there's somebody that's brought us hurt, that makes it hard for us to love those people. And so I think that's those are all examples, or those both examples of people that we may struggle with loving. You probably came up with some better thoughts on that. Second question here: how would you describe the common perception of love? How would you describe the common perception of love? Let me take a moment, or give you a moment to discuss that. Just think about, in culture and society, the common perception of love. How would you describe that? Let me give you a moment to discuss that. Okay, I don't know what exactly you came up with as far as the common perception of love. Again, no right answer on this, but I would say, if I had to describe what is culture's common perception of love, what is the way love is thought of in our world today, I would say it's earned affection. Okay, or maybe another way to say it would be deserved affection. It would be that somebody has earned the right to our affection, that they have done something for us, they have shown us kindness, they have shown us affection, and so that is, affection becomes mutual. I think that is probably the way that love manifests itself in our world today. Is just people almost have the mentality that I'll love you if you love me, and it's not necessarily a choice or a one-way street by any stretch. It's something that has to be reciprocal in our mentality, which I think we're going to find out maybe from the Jesus story that we're going to be looking at today, even that biblical love does not have to have that reciprocity. Biblical love does not have to be something that is earned or is deserved. It's something that is just freely given. So we will look at that a little bit more as we get into it here. And so with that, let me invite you to turn to Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. Luke 10, 25 through 37 is where we're at. And if you are not familiar with that reference immediately, it is what has been called the parable of the Good Samaritan. That's not the name that Jesus gave to it, but that's the way this has popularly been known. And it's really a remarkable story that Jesus told. And so let me read that to you here. Actually, let me give you a moment to read it to you. Read it yourself there from a version that you might want to read from, or maybe a couple versions. It's not terribly long. And just try to think about that for a minute. Let me give you a moment to read that. All right, let me read to you here from Luke chapter 10, 25. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, desiring, and that is the lawyer, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? But Jesus replied, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was. And when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he set him on his own animal and brought him to the inn to take care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back." Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? The lawyer said, "Well, the one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." Interesting exchange there. Well-known story, but there is so much there to talk about. It's just a lot in this little story Jesus told. So the first question here that I want to ask is, why do you think the lawyer asked Jesus who his neighbor was? Let me ask that again. Why do you think the lawyer asked Jesus who his neighbor was? Let me give you a moment to discuss that. Okay, well, just to be clear, now we're talking about a lawyer here. I think it's important just to get an idea of, when we're talking about a lawyer here, it's not talking about a person who was our modern day idea of lawyer. This was a Roman controlled area, right? Israel was this region, the Promised Land, was controlled by Rome at this time. So legally, Romans' laws predominated. However, Israel, because of its religious background, was ruled also by on a lower scale, and this was subservient to Rome's laws, but was ruled by religious law as well. And so the Romans gave the religious authorities in Israel a certain degree of latitude to implement their religious law. And so this lawyer here is not an expert on Roman law. This is an expert on God's law. This is a person who is an expert on the law of God given in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. And so these individuals here, or this individual that's designated a lawyer and the others who are lawyers, were law experts. And so he knew God's law inside and out. He knew exactly what it had to say. But I'm not sure that he really wanted to know the answer to this question. And I say that because if you look in verse 25, it says here, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test. And so I'm not sure if he was really wanting to find out information or if he was just really trying to trap Jesus up a little bit, trip him up by asking him a question that he thought he would answer somehow inappropriately. So he put him to the test. Either he wanted to trip Jesus up with another question, or otherwise he wanted to just prove himself righteous, which is another rationale he gives for his next question. So it's hard to say, what all was going on here, but I think he was trying to demonstrate his righteousness, certainly, as we see. You look at verse, 20, in 26, Jesus doesn't give him the answer. He says, well, you're the law expert. How do you read it? So he asks him, you're the expert in the law of God. And the man answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, or strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself, which he was exactly correct. In fact, Jesus said the same thing elsewhere, that you sum the whole law of God up in the idea of loving God and loving your neighbor. And so this is what the summary of the law looked like. And he said to him, Jesus said to him, you have answered correctly. Do this and you'll live. But this is where the lawyer went wrong. The lawyer should have stopped while he was ahead, if we can say it that way. But instead, he wanted to ask this other question. This is where I think he wanted to justify himself, is what this says. He's desiring to justify himself. But what does that mean? I kind of think that this is the show off in class, is what was going on here. If you ever have been in a class environment, oftentimes you will have somebody in that class who asks questions not to get the answer, but to kind of show off their knowledge. I wonder if that's exactly what this fellow was doing here. And I think he wanted to showcase the fact that he kept this perfectly, and he recognized Jesus as a teacher, and so he wanted Jesus' stamp of approval on how he was living. And in fact, Jesus says, back here when he tells Jesus his answer to asks him how he reads the law, the lawyer gave that answer, and then Jesus said, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." Correctly, interestingly enough, is that word correctly is the word that we get our word orthodoxy from, or orthodox, orthos. It's this idea of this guy had all the right answers. He was right down the line. He knew what was true. He knew the truth. He had the orthodox answer that you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you love your neighbor as yourself. He had that right as could be. He was exactly correct about that. But the problem was he didn't have orthopraxis, which is an unfamiliar word, but he believed right, he knew right, but he didn't live that out. And Jesus is much more interested in obeying his word than he is in knowing his word. Okay, both are important, but Jesus is really concerned at the end of the day about us putting his word into practice. You can remember back to the story of the two builders, right, in the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus says that there's two builders. One built his house on the sand. One built his house on the rock. And you remember what the difference was. It wasn't that one knew God's word, knew Jesus' words, and the other didn't. It was one put them into practice, and the other didn't. And so this is exactly what we have here. This guy knew the right stuff and believed the right stuff, but he didn't live the stuff to the degree that he thought he did. And so it didn't work out so well for him proving himself right or justifying himself. Next question. What was ironic about Jesus saying it was a priest and a Levite who passed by the wounded man? What was ironic about Jesus saying that it was a priest and a Levite who passed by the wounded man? Let me give you a moment to discuss that. Okay, there is a bit of irony here in the story that Jesus told when he used these first two figures that passed by the man who was injured. Just a little background and explain. This man was heading down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and geographically that's exactly what it is. Jerusalem is at a high elevation, Jericho is at a low elevation down toward the Jordan River, and so this man was making a very windy, rocky, dangerous trek down there. And it was dangerous because there was lots of places for bandits to hide, lots of places for robbers to hide. And so he takes this dangerous road, and you have these two men that pass by him on the other side of the road, avoiding him. One was a priest. The first one was a priest, and priests were the ones whose main duty was to offer sacrifices in the temple. Very important. They were like the religious muckety-mucks in a sense. And then there was the Levites, and they maintained the temple. So both these people were what we would call clergy people. These were the clergymen that were passing by. And so these were people that had, again, all the right stuff, all the right information, all the right beliefs. And yet, when it came to putting that into practice, neither one of them did it very well. Now, some have said, well, this was because they feared defilement, because there was things in the law about you couldn't touch a dead body, and maybe they thought, oh, this guy was already dead. I don't think that's the case, and I'll tell you, there's a little clue there. At least of the priest, I believe it says he was going down he's going down, and so that means, is the best I can figure, he was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. If that is the case, that means he had already finished his priestly service. He was headed out of town. And also the same thing with the Levite. He was going down the same way. And so it sounds like they didn't fear defilement. They knew this guy wasn't dead. They just didn't want to get involved. They just didn't want to get involved with this man. And so they walked on past. Okay. So when he says that this was a priest and a Levite, it just underscores the fact that just because you know the right things doesn't mean that you love well. And Jesus pointed out that neither one of these men loved the neighbor. But then there's this third fellow, right? Okay, next question. Would it have been easy or natural, for this Samaritan to help the wounded man? Why do you answer the way you do? Let me ask that question again. Would it have been easy or natural for the Samaritan to help the wounded man? Why do you answer the way you do? So let me give you a moment to answer that question or think through that question. And I will say that why do you answer the way you do is added on for a reason. Don't just say yes or no. Justify your answer. Tell us why you think that. Why would it have been easy or natural for the Samaritan to help the wounded man, and why you answer the way you do? Let me give you a moment to discuss that. All right, I don't know what you came up with there, but maybe we don't know a whole lot about Samaritans because they're not somebody that's running around. I mean, it's not like you're going to go to someplace in Marshall County and say, "Oh, look, that's a Samaritan." I mean, we just don't have those around. But let me explain a little bit about what a Samaritan was, and we get some of this from a Jewish historian Josephus and from other sources, but the best thing we can figure is, what we do know is that they were like mixed breeds, and they mixed breeds of people, and it's two different ethnicities, but they also had mixed religion, that they had some of the Jewish religion, but they had their own beliefs mixed in there as well. So Josephus tells us that in 720, well, we know this from history, but in 721 BC, that the Assyrian Empire came in and conquered the northern portion of Israel. And so they took northern Israel into captivity. And these Samaritans were the people who had intermarried with the Assyrians who came in. They intermarried with them, and so they had children of a mixed race, if you want to say it that way. And so they, as a result of this, they absolutely despised, the Jews really despised the Samaritans. They looked down on them, and then it was a mutual feeling, really, and neither one of them liked each other. But they despised the Samaritans because they were the people who were not pure Jews, either in ethnicity or in practice. So they despised them on religious and ethnic grounds, that they were the people that were impure, right? And so this is for anyone. Well, let me just say, for anyone to get involved in caring for somebody like this, this person who is injured, it says is half dead on the side of the road. It wouldn't have been easy. It would have been a major inconvenience, if we can say it that way. For anybody to help somebody like this, it would have taken some significant investment of time, and as we're going to see, money. It was a pain in the neck, but it would be unimaginable that a Samaritan, I think when Jesus said, "But a Samaritan stopped," I think that was disgusting, and it was shocking to hear that in Jesus' story, even though Jesus didn't present this as a true story, he just said this is illustrating something. He told this parable. In fact, I'm trying to think here if it says, he says, I don't know if it's specifically identified as a parable in the text, but Jesus doesn't tell this like it's necessarily a true story. He just says this is what happened, and uses this to illustrate his point. But to use the Samaritan as the one who rescued this man, it would have been unimaginable to a Jew listening to this. But nevertheless, Jesus says it was the Samaritan who went out of his way and helped. So would it have been easier or natural for the Samaritan to help the wounded man? Absolutely not, because that Samaritan had no love for a Jew naturally, at least from an ethnic or religious standpoint. I think a lot of Jews, and maybe this Levite and this, for a lot of Samaritans, looking at this Jew that was injured, and certainly, they would have just said, hey, just let this guy die. The Levite and the priest that came by, this was one of their people. This was one of their kinsmen, and they didn't help this guy. But this guy who had no interest in helping this fella, this guy who religiously and ethnically was different than this fellow who was hurt, he was the one that reached out. He was the one that stuck his neck out and helped. Next question, and last question, what do you think went through the Samaritan's mind as he decided to help the wounded man? What did it cost him? So there's a couple questions there, right? What do you think went through the Samaritan's mind as he decided to help the wounded man? And what did it cost him? Let me take a moment, give you a moment, think through that, and then also discuss through it, and then we'll come back in just a moment. All right, I don't know what you came up with on this. There's a couple questions here. The first one is really conjecture, right? I mean, that's just you a little bit left up to our imagination is what went through the Samaritan's mind. But I can imagine, actually, I don't have to imagine one thing that went through his mind, or at least through his heart, because we're told that in the text. In verse 33, look at how Jesus describes this Samaritan's reaction to this injured man. In verse 33, it says, "But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him," look at those three words, "he had compassion." He had compassion. That is a word of deep feeling. He saw this man injured, saw this man hurting, saw this man half dead, and he could have gone on, he could have left, he could have just stayed on his way, just like the priest and the Levite. But instead, he felt sympathy. He hurt with the man, we might say. He felt the man's hurt in his own heart. I look at this. And I don't know what else went through his mind. I don't know if he thought about things that he was going to have to not attend to in order to attend to this man. I'm not sure if he thought about his schedule being interrupted. I'm not sure what he thought about. But what we do know he thought about was that he had sympathy for the man, that his heart went out to this man, and he felt the hurt that this man felt. Well, what did it cost him? What did it cost this Samaritan? Well, you think about this, and I think there's a lot to consider on this question. Well, first of all, it took his time. In fact, we see that it took his entire day. He poured on oil and wine, set him on his animal, brought him to the inn, took care of him, and he says, "I'll repay you when you come back." And it says, because it says the next day he took out 2 denarii. That means that he cared for this man overnight, it sounds like. Now just imagine, this was not his friend. This was not his associate. This was not his lifelong pal. This was a stranger injured on the road. And Jesus says that this Samaritan took his entire day, set aside his agenda, his schedule, and because his heart went out to this man, he took care of him. And he addressed his needs and he addressed his hurt. It's pretty remarkable. Not just time, but it says he took out, doesn't it say he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper? Now that's not an insignificant amount of money. 2 denarii was the amount that a person made in a day, an average worker made in a day. And so I don't know what that is for you. Maybe for you that's $200, make $100 a day, $300, $400, whatever it is. This Samaritan, to a total stranger, funded that amount. Now, I don't know how many of us, for a total stranger, would take a whole day out of our schedule to address that stranger's needs. But furthermore, I don't know how many of us would take 2 days' wages, whatever that is, to pay for the care of a perfect stranger. But that's exactly what this Samaritan did. It's a rough parable. When I look at this parable, It doesn't provide any loopholes. It doesn't let any of us off easy. It's a rough parable. If I have to be honest with you, I wanted when the lawyer asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" I wish Jesus had given a very restricted, highly defined, specific answer. And so, well, this is who your neighbor is. But Jesus didn't do that. Jesus told a parable that was open-ended and that leaves, I guess you might say, more questions than answers. Because Jesus depicted a man who was injured, who had very real needs, and a man who didn't know him, that had not, his love wasn't earned, his love wasn't deserved, but he showed love nonetheless to this man at personal cost of time and personal cost of money. And when I look at my own life, I think, would I ever be like that Samaritan? Have I ever even been like that Samaritan? Oh, sure, I've done nice things for friends. But for somebody who is a stranger, and even for a stranger with whom I have great differences, would I love that well? It's a question I think that all of us can ask, should ask. And Jesus' words here concern me, because I wonder if oftentimes I have all the right answers and am very orthodox in what I believe, but maybe my practice is not what Jesus has called me to, and maybe that our practice is not all that Jesus has called us to. Now, this can be overwhelming, and I'm not trying to suggest everybody you find around you that has a need, you need to address those needs. You need to take a day off of work, and you need to take 2 days' wages or more. That wasn't Jesus' point. And it's impossible, by the way, because our world is filled with needs. But the danger is sometimes that we don't help anybody because we can't help everybody. Is there somebody, though, that you could help? Or some bodies that you could help? People around you that you know about who have needs that you can address in a meaningful way, that you can love, even though they haven't earned your love or deserved your love. That's a question to think about. And I hope that this story Jesus told can lead us in the right direction toward loving in a more Jesus-like way. Who is my neighbor? Well, we don't get a simple answer from Jesus. We get a story that drives us deeper into the heart of God for people. Let me close with prayer, and I hope that we can think through this and live it out. Father, thank you so much for letting us be able to look into your word today. Thank you for this story that your son told. And Father, frankly, it is a little bit hard for us to take in, because this is lavish love that this Samaritan showed. But I pray that we would make progress toward loving in a way that doesn't love those who deserve it or those who've earned it in some way, but progress toward a love that is like your love, that even while we were still sinners, you demonstrated your love because Christ died for us. Help us to love more like you each day. Please work in our lives to that end. Thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, everybody, thank you so much. It is so good to be with you as always, and we will catch up with you next time. Have a great week.